wonderful session we just got out of. Wonderful as in sobering. And one group of marginalized students that I think it is safe to say still exists on some level. And I'd like to open this up with asking the question, who are marginalized students on this campus? Who are marginalized students on this campus? As I was getting ready to, thinking about this, yes, sometimes we think we know who they are, but it goes so deeper. These students don't walk around with a placard that says, I'm marginalized. And as I was reading up, I just want to frame this with some stats here that I got from Lee. I think it's safe to say that types of marginalized students could range from gender identity, disability, race, language, religion. In my work with LEAD this past semester, I became acquainted with the fact that we have students who are emancipated, and they're around on our campuses, on our campus, emancipated from their parents. Is that a group that's marginalized? What about first-generation Christian? We are a Christian campus, but there are many students who give their hearts and lives to Jesus. Just a few months, they arrive here, and this is a very foreign place for them. They don't understand what we're doing, why we're doing what we're doing. Are they marginalized? Veterans. If you will recall, last July, at commissioning, we had an African-American student, Quincy. He was in the College of Ed. Do you all remember him? I happen to know Quincy because he went with me when I did a study abroad to Spain and Morocco. And he spoke so nicely about coming to Lee and having to have a paradigm shift in terms of how he learned, how he absorbed information. And we take it for granted. These kids are on our campus, whatever they've gone through, it's a different learning experience. So the list continues. There might be others. I'm not going to go into it, but here's some general stats here, just to remind you. Female to male ratio, 60% to 39%, and it's going lower. Ethnic statistics, Black students who identify as Black Americans, 7.54. Now, I listened to John's presentation. He said 50 years ago it was 1%. So in 50 years, we've grown by 6%. Asian, 1.78. Hispanic, 4.74. White, 82.62. Clearly a majority on this campus. So we've gone through gender and ethnicity. Where do our students come from? The top 10 states, 9 of which are southern states, carry 85% of our student population. The only other state is Michigan in the top 10. Students come from 49 states, all but Utah. We have 207 students who list citizenship with another country. The top one, many of you know, Nigeria, then Bahamas, then Mexico. And basically, the numbers dwindled. I was surprised. I calculated there are at least 30 countries represented on this campus where we only have one student. What isolation. 30 countries, and in these 30, one student. I won't go through that, but yeah. And then in terms of financial preparedness or financial need, the number of students who apply for need-based financial aid on this campus, 3,336 students. And the number who got it, which means by the government, they were deemed in line to receive it, 2,619 students. All of these students have needs. And we all know the story. How many of you have talked to students who say, I don't have the money, but it looks on paper that my parents make too much. Mm-hmm. So just imagine. So there's a lot of diversity here with this, and I just want to start the conversation. I'll jump in later on by framing who are our students and just giving a reminder.
I am a product of Lee twice over, and I was addressing a group of students last year, 2 years ago now, and I showed a picture of our family, and I said, if you look at us, we look as if we are African American, and yet there are different cultures within our household, because I was born and raised in England. My husband, Ty, the president of my fan club, is a native New Yorker. When I was 16, if you know anything about Western European culture, you leave school when you are 16.
Yeah.
And so I came to America in August after leaving school, not graduating, because you do not matriculate until you leave university. There's no such thing as a high school graduation. Yeah. And so when we came to America, and you stand up in a university classroom and you say that you are 16, there's a gasp. So what I bring to the table when I have an international student sitting before me in evangelistic singers, I get it. Because when we first moved to America, we didn't have our immigration status. And so we had to go through all that comes with the I-20 forms and all the forms and you're nodding because you get it. But then when it comes to African Americans, I learned from my husband, and our poor child is confused because my parents are from the Caribbean. So she has this wealth of culture that Ty and I bring to the table, but she is not confused. She identifies with the Caribbean culture, she identifies with African American, she identifies with being born at just a few miles away from here at Terre-Neuve when it was Bradley Memorial. Prior to Sky Ridge and everything else that it's been called. So in fact, she told me the other day, she says, Mama, do you know that I am the only Southern person in this, and she speaks like I do, so she, do you know that I'm the only, I know how to speak Southern. And she was very proud of that. So she's been able to be a part of the UN, that's our immediate family. And she's all the richer for that. So when you have 13 different nationalities represented with the class that we call the evangelistic singers, I feel so much at home. Because I think that's one of the reasons, because people ask me, Gloria, why does EVS work? And I said, well, because the children that are a part of the class they saw something that caused them to audition, and if you've ever been through an audition situation, it is traumatic. But they braved that because from the outside looking in, they found a safe place. And so I asked I asked a group of students from the class, why is it that you speak so freely in class rehearsal? Not being disrespectful, not speaking when I'm speaking, but when it's time for you to speak, you speak out, or you give input to the class production. And yet, I have colleagues that say that you come to class, which I'm very glad for. You go to class, but you don't speak out in my colleagues' classes. Why is that? I think I know, but you tell me. And they said, Mrs. Gloria, we feel safe. We trust you. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. I feel great about that for me, but how can we translate that so it's across the board? What can my colleagues do to make you feel safe in their classes? And something I would suggest, and something that I've heard them articulate, is if they are, for example, an African American, if they are the only or you perceive that they're African American, if they are the only black child in your class, then it feels so overwhelming if there's a black topic, or a Hispanic topic, or an Asian topic, and then they are suddenly deemed the expert in that. Because as I said at the beginning of my comments, when you look at our family, it looks one way, but it is something completely different. When I'm really tired and I'm struggling to find what an American term would be, and I'm tired and I forget and I resort to a Western European moniker for it, I'll say, Ty, what do you call this? Because even though I came from an English-speaking country, it's two different worlds. It's two different points of view. And so Ty's my translator for a lot of things. But if they can find a safe place, that was the big thing. And also, they are not the expert at all things, what they look like, the package. And that's what they want you to know. Even though they have this look, this outside look, get to know me on a personal level, which is going to cost you something. It's going to cost you your time. And trust me, as Carolyn says, I'm a second shifter at Lee, because I come in after I'm with Cleveland City Schools, and I do my work over at Pangle or over the CRR with the children, with the tall children, EBS. But I'm tired when I come into the classroom, but I lay all that aside because they need to see me at my A game. And so I'm engaged with them beyond the classroom. Because it was really important to me, if we're gonna make great music, I've gotta know what's going on in your heart too. And I've gotta let you into my world. And so what they enjoy about the class is that I will listen to them. I'll stop and I'll listen to them. I won't interrupt them. And I'll let them, I will allow them to be their authentic self. And it costs something. It really does. But I have no regrets, because I think if you've ever witnessed the evangelistics, you immediately know that they love what they're doing. That is not by accident. It is not the music. It's the atmosphere that they can make music in. And they like the way that I am strict, yet I'm fair. If I'm disciplining them, I'm not breaking their spirit. And what they would like is, if you want them to engage in your classes, email them or call them up and ask them, would you mind answering a question? Here's what I'm going to talk about in my next lecture. Here's what we're going to talk about in class. Here's what we're going to explore. Would you mind? And there are some children that don't talk to me in class. I do not have 100% yappers, because by nature they are shy, they are reserved. But one-on-one, they will speak with me, or in a small group. And every semester, guys, I see everyone on the roster at least once a semester, just to find out, hey, how are you doing? How are you really doing? How's your family? And I've earned their trust. When I first returned to Lee, there was one child that did not trust me at all, and I knew he didn't trust me because of things that had happened in the past with other professors. And so I did not stop being myself, but I did not stop him being himself too. And it ended up, he graduated, praise the Lord. His name is Nathan Ramsey. Some of you may remember him. And he has become a friend. It's beyond a student now. He has become a friend because I took the time to invest. Mayor.
I did a little presentation. Carolyn stopped me if it gets too long. I went with the 12-minute.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Here's your comment.
Okay, cool. This is going to move on nicely from what Gloria was talking about. The word safe, I think, is such an important. And Carolyn asked me to talk about, particularly to bring in how I use discussion of current events in class to lead to facilitating, bringing all the students, into the conversation and attempt to. And so that's why I said moving from the margins to the center. And one thing I constantly want to reaffirm in class is all the importance of unity and diversity, all being made in God's image. And so I decided, well, I'm just going to talk about one class I taught last semester, which is a large 50-person core class where pretty much all the books we're reading except for one are written by dead white men. There's no problem with that. They're wonderful books, but there's not a lot of diversity represented in, who wrote the books until we get to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. We start with Shakespeare and get to Frankenstein. But even within that context, and there's a way to have representation of other topics and points of view, even that are within those texts. They're not all just about that person's particular individual experience. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But what I wanted to do is to really focus on the fact that I think students become better learners when they know they are loved, when they know they are valuable. And how do you do that? And with me, 50 people, it's a humanities class. I'm telling you, about 35 of them are like, ugh. Why am I taking this at the beginning of the semester? I love when the conversion moment happens and they come and say, wait a minute, this actually relates to my life. And then that's very exciting. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And so I think that's a challenge. How can I make this a safe space? Especially for the students who are in there who are not part of the majority culture. And so I'm going to just talk a few things. So I want to talk about creating a community of empathy in the classroom.
That's one of my children.
Which, well, this is kind of cheating. It's not really my class lecture. This is when the libertarians, I keep getting libertarians and libertinos mixed up and saying libertarians, libertarians. I keep mixing those names. Anyway, asked me to speak on Black Lives Matter, and it was very interesting just with that listed posters around. I walked in, I was like, I didn't know Lee was so diverse. because I've never been in a classroom that looked like, anyway, so that was amazing. But I want to talk about creating a sense of empathy in the classroom. And what I really, one thing I've been, I think, more convicted, I'm learning more and more every semester. I am not the expert in this. I'm learning from the students. And I'm learning more and more that the students that are part of the majority culture, one way we can help the students in a minority culture be better learners is to teach those in the majority culture more about them and empower the minority students to speak out and tell their stories, because that's transformative to the majority culture students. And I'm going to give some examples about that. So I just want to mention this. This is a slide I show in class beginning of every semester. Imagination is key to morality. If you can't imagine what it is to live in someone else's head, then you're more likely to hurt them. And so we talk in class about empathy and how hearing the stories of others can cause us to pause a moment and see the image of God in them rather than label and dismiss them. And so that's why even with the literature we read in my classes and thinking about the authors as people made in God's image, but also about their classmates and trying to cultivate that whole community. And I know not all of you are teaching literature or humanities-based disciplines, but this can be done even in the devotional. There are many ways this can be incorporated. And I also wanted to mention just, always trying to, speaking of devotional, I do try to bring in verses that relate both to the text we read, but also that are constantly encouraging them to carry one another's burdens, to rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. That if one part of the body of Christ suffers, every part suffers. And really, thinking about this is asking us to be empathetic with one another, and that I like to emphasize that we really need to cultivate our imaginations in order to love one another. That Graham Greene says hatred is a failure of imagination. If you have a constricted imagination because you know very little about someone else's point of view or their life, then you end up, it's really easy to hurt them. It's really easy to label them. It's really easy to not see God's image in them. So I even do things, even during my devotional, and again, I'm just using this one class example of last semester because things came together well last semester, and I was happy with the way students were interacting. But even bringing something in that's a contemporary, many of you probably know the Humans of New York site, and these are photos of Syrian refugees arriving in the country, and just even I even had an extra credit assignment where they could go and read some of these stories. Just go through the humans. I forewarned them, it's not edited. You don't know what you're going to come across. This is real raw life. So, PG-13, I'm warning. But they went and they could write on that, and I don't know, just that idea of encountering the story of another, and this can be brought into a devotional, or I gave an extra credit assignment with that. Even I was shocked in my devotionals, sometimes I'll play, one of my students suggested, we were reading Candide by Voltaire, and there's a part in there about Candide encountering a slave who had part of his armed legs cut off, and he said, this is the price you pay for sugar in Europe. And we talked about how, is that really over? Do we benefit in our comfort from the misfortune of others? And we talked about, and one student suggested a documentary she'd watched on this. And so I just played the clip in class at the beginning of class. I can't tell you how many students in the semester said, my mother and I watched that. And, so just even these brief mention of things have been powerful. But I just wanted to, I think the main word, maybe one word connected to empathy is representation in class, and I feel like if students don't feel represented in class, they're more likely to feel silenced. So if there's no one, it's hard when there's no one around, and I'm talking particularly racially in these examples, but this also happens when talking about things like, mental illness. We read Dejection and Ode by Coleridge. It's the first poem written about depression. And I can't tell you how many students would say, either that's impacted me because he sounds just like me. I had a student once write a poetic response to this in class, a student who comes from a very abusive home. She is a marginalized student. She's been told all her life how stupid she is, and she came and talked. She said, "Can I come talk to you?" And it was so urgent, and I'm thinking, oh, it's about a grade or extra credit, and it was about this, and it's just the fact that, and then I had other students say, "I'm so glad I read this because now I can relate to my best friend who is depressed." So it's not just about race. That's going to be the main topic, but there are many different ways to put that in. But representation, I've had many, particularly African American students, but also international students of color. But I'm just thinking, many of our African American students that will be very silent in class, then they come into my office because they feel like they can come in because I've brought these topics up in class, even at the beginning of class, and they'll come in and tell me about things that have happened that they never speak about, they don't complain about, but they say, "I'm scared to ever say anything because I'm going to be accused of playing the race card. I'm being labeled and dismissed." And I remember last year when we had these sessions, there was one student, remember we had that little fishbowl, some of you maybe went, and the students were talking, and I think one of the most powerful things was a student who said, when everyone was praying for Paris, which she thought we need to do, it was painful to her because she hadn't been in a single class where a professor had mentioned praying for the African American men who'd been shot and killed. And she's like, do we just not matter? And she was crying in the midst of this, and that really impacted me more. So I think that's one reason this semester, this was even more, on my mind and heart, that kind of representation. You can also bring in things like, for a devotion, playing a song. It doesn't have to totally relate to your subject matter. And Trip Lee, spoke in chapel, but before that, he has you can look this up. It's a fantastic, deeply Christian take on the fallout kind of after Ferguson. It Could Have Been Me, about his life experiences. Also, Lecrae, I talk about a lot of things Lecrae, the hip hop artist who's been here, wrote. And these are men who are very godly and who are not, they're not operating on a false dichotomy that all cops bad and all, it's not like that at all. And also, I've asked students in class to pray for a police officer who got shot in the neighborhood of my church, so it's like, you just want to have one side of that. But I was just going to mention a work of literature. This is, we start out with Othello. And if anybody's read Othello, it's all about racial profiling. And it's all about, Othello, who is a North African and marries a white, Venetian woman. And everybody loves him, and he's applauded for his physical strength. I mean, this really gets into stereotyping of, well, he's a strong general, but once he gets it too close to the white community, whoa, it's very... And there's so much racist language. And then there's this backhanded racist compliment. If virtue no delighted beauty lack, your son-in-law is far more fair than black. Mm-hmm. And we talked about this a lot, basically saying he's okay because he's really white inside. He might look scary and ugly on the outside, which is what they continually say. So then I showed them a clip for the day Beyonce turned black from Saturday Night Live. Did you? I like bringing in, and they loved it. The fear, kind of a fear of blackness. But from this, right in the midst of reading this and discussing this, Terrence Crutcher was shot, and I put this on the board. He's a big black guy. He looks like a bad dude, and the students made the connections. Most of the black students, already knew the connection. A lot of white students were like, whoa, this is a long history of this stuff. And in the midst of this also, it was a Saturday night at about 11 p.m., I had an African-American student contact me, and then I ended up talking to her on the phone about a profiling incident. She was not overreacting. It was very legitimate, and it was on Lee's campus. And then she was able to because she did say, because we've talked about this in class, usually I wouldn't say anything, but because this was mentioned in class, I felt it was okay to say something. And she ended up talking to a couple of administrators who were wonderful told her they wanted to help empower her voice, and they believed her, and it was all resolved very beautifully. And it was just, yeah, the student's going to go away from Lee feeling loved and feeling heard, and that's a real compliment to the administrators that worked with her. Just kind of, this is the end because I know I'm go on forever about it, but I was just going to say the empowerment and transformation of our students. I would create a space, and I should have put safe space, for diverse students to share their stories. It's both empowering for those speaking and transformative for those hearing the stories. What has happened last semester in this class that really was like, whoa, humbled me, is so many of my students of color did start to speak out because of the Trip Lee song or the mention of Terrence Crutcher or other topics. And then at the end of the semester, I had many of the majority culture students write. Well, this was actually, I gave them a question on the exam. It was just an extra credit. Has your conceptual framework been challenged? Which is a term I taught them in class, to see if they really know that term. Meaning, has your worldview as your point of view? And I was shocked, out of, the 50 students, I would say almost half or more wrote about race. We'd also read Descartes and other, but so many students wrote things like this. Things like, and they're kind of admitting, let's see. I've always tried not to be racist, but I know that I've behaved in ways that betray that I do have some racist perceptions. Hearing from black classmates has made a huge difference. I have really learned from hearing their stories. And this was humbling and wonderful. I was like, this isn't about me. This is about, this one's pretty amazing. And that was not asterisks. That was the full use of that word multiple times in this. I was like, whoa. Shakespeare would be happy with that, I hope. Yeah. And what I thought, it takes a lot of bravery, because these students, and this one, she says, I'm ashamed that I'm just now realizing it. So I thought, I've got to affirm her too and say, that's amazing that you're admitting and that you want to change, that you're seeing that about yourself. And I even I've seen white students. I have a student from the Bahamas that I was talking outside the doorway, and I had this a white student come out, and she was just kind of lingering because this student and I were having a discussion about race. But she's like, I just want to hear more. I just want to learn more about this. I just want to be. So many of these students were just like, I just didn't know, and it's really easy, I think, for me as a professor to assume, oh, these students know about this stuff. A lot of them don't. So I think I've been convicted that the way that I can help my students on the margin to learn better is, part of it is to educate the students that are in the majority culture as well. That's a big part, as well as showing, love for them. Yeah, I used to view black people as a threat. And these are very... So, and this, again, I'm transformed from hearing these from the students themselves. I think that's the last one. Whether you're African American, white, male, or female, you have worth and potential because you're made in the image of God. I was like, hello, Paul. Whether you're Greek or Jew. So just to recap that, I just wanted to emphasize representation in class topics or devotion leads to empowerment for diverse students. This creates a space for students to respond, ask questions, and share stories. And then this leads to empathetic responses to those stories. So it's a reflexive relationship that I think is developing empathy and true love from, majority and minority culture students. So.
Mary.
Yep.
What's going on in the classrooms that you occupy is why I feel so much at home in EVS is because I have the reverse, because I have a huge percentage of minorities.
Yeah.
And then I have a growing number, thank God, of the majority that's on this campus. But here's what is the beauty of that mosaic, is that all God's children are welcome and feel safe in that environment. And I absolutely want to put a stamp of approval on what it is you're doing, because they want to learn about each other. This generation, this group of children, tall children that we teach on this campus, the ones I'm in contact with, so let me just speak to them, they want to know about each other.
Yeah.
And they notice when I, as a teacher, that I intentionally include everyone. So that means the leadership, I'm not just talking to Mary, the leadership team of evangelistic singers reflects what's going on in the classroom proper. So even though what I'm charged to teach is Black gospel from spirituals through urban contemporary, that's my course content. But the children, it doesn't matter what they look like on the outside. It's like, you know what? They don't even some of them don't even call it a class. They call it family time that they're getting credit for. That's huge. And it's intentional because that's the way that Dr. and Sister Horton made me feel when I came here as a student. I always used to say to people, they are the white equivalent of my mom and dad. I knew they were white, but they treated me as a person. Dr. Thompson is one of my teachers. And Dr. Linda honestly, you are one of my favorite teachers because of the way that you make me feel. You make me want to be a better version of myself. And I'm just not just saying that because you're my boss. But you know, it does help. The Monopoly money's not working anymore. But it's something how you allow people to feel that they are of great value. Red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight. And if we are carriers of Christ, if we are Christ followers, it just seems all the more logical that what we read about and that what we listen to should spill into every area of our life, every moment of our life. So yeah, they want to know about each other and they're interested.
And they do, but sometimes they don't know they want to know about each other
Right.
initially.
Exactly.
That's what I've learned, that sometimes they think, oh, I already know about the way that person is. And then they realize, whoa, I didn't know much at all. And that keeps happening to me too, like, whoa, this is, you know, anybody who's serious about learning realizes, wow, and human beings are incredibly complex. And it's all about the image of God and the complexity and beauty of that. So.
Two quick stories. We just came out of, and they're very different. We just came out of looking at the grades of our students from last semester in LEAP. And there's one student, I'll call his name John, a gifted student with a disability. And we know very gifted, came in here with very high scores. And just very proud of him, you know, and what he's doing and accomplishing. And when we looked at the grades, all F's, but in 2 classes. We're still flushing this out, but what we can conclude so far is Johnny had a relationship with the teachers of those 2 classes. All right? Made a difference. Made a difference. Johnny's the kind of student who will get lost, not very charismatic. As I said, he has a disability, but the 2 classes had a relationship. This teacher call, even took the extra time, that sort of thing. So that, I want to keep that in mind. The second story is in response to your presentation about some of the language that students are saying, I use this word and that word. So, some time ago, I had a student. I like this student. The student likes me, and you know, you have different levels of relationships with students. This was one that clearly had a closer relationship with me. And charismatic, involved, every club and organization on this campus up there. Teachers take note of this student. Yeah, I already said it's a she. And just very outgoing, everything. Came in to see me. Forlorn. So what's wrong, Mary? In a funk, I could see you. What's up? I gotta tell you something. It's all right. You know, I've had the, I'm immune to what's gonna come out. Long story short, from a southern state, Dad is in the Ku Klux Klan. And there's that shame, but also this student nicely articulated it to me. Suzanne, I'm not like that. I said, no, you're not like that. You know, I had to be this, no, I get it, that's all right. But reminded me of the fact that you just don't change overnight when you land on this campus.
Right.
And I leave that in relation to some of the examples she said. So we have a lot of students on this campus. It just doesn't turn like that. What I said earlier, out of the top 10 states, and I'm not labeling states and I'm not trying to stereotype, but our students arrive here, and part of our responsibility is to help them make that shift. It just doesn't happen overnight. Family using the N-word in their homes, it just doesn't change when they arrive here.